Mixed marriages across cultural, racial, and religious boundaries have taken place from time immemorial. But this has not necessarily broken down resistance to the practice even today. While some couples in the Western countries and their families seem to now find a common chord in Islam, the basis for their way of life, with racial and cultural differences not distressing them anymore, majority of Muslim communities, especially the elders, still have hang-ups when it comes to one of their own marrying in a different culture. And black brothers in particular, many having reverted to Islam attracted by its anti-racist philosophy, face the stiffest challenges.
I felt that it would be better if I found somebody who had a similar understanding, maybe a similar journey, a similar spiritual journey in terms of the conversion or reversion to Islam, and of course somebody who grew up in the West as well. It became very apparent to me early on that such a goal was unrealistic, and so that was the approach that I decided to take with regards to looking for a wife as well. I have to give people the benefit of the doubt in the sense that I've approached some scholars. I've asked scholars to put my name down on certain lists and registers so that they may be able to put my name forward to any families that are looking for potential husbands for their children. But to say that I've had this conversation direct with a potential father-in-law has never happened. I have had situations where I have been speaking to sisters from the born Muslim communities in some cases over a number of months, stretching on to a year. And those conversations with the idea of looking to see if there is compatibility for marriage seemed to go quite well. But of course, unfortunately, it seemed that the stumbling block was always when the sister in question would maybe put the question to her parents. The response after those conversations would become very cold towards me, and I can only assume, God knows best, that the reason was because they basically received a no. Under no circumstances would it be possible for her to even consider marrying somebody like me. I know of maybe two brothers who have been able to marry sisters from the born community who were black themselves. And in one of those situations, it was quite serious in the sense that the parents had decided that they were going to disown this daughter because she was bringing shame on the family. However, her being, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but from my understanding of the situation, being quite headstrong and stubborn, and maybe not stubborn, but she persevered because she loved the brother in question and believed that he would be right for her. It got to a stage where one day the parents basically, I think a day or two before the marriage, realised that it was going to take place, and then reluctantly chose to accept because they just didn't want to lose their daughter. And I remember a particular situation with regards to one sister who I was speaking to over a number of months, and from one of the communities, a Khoja community actually. And I remember once it was pointed out to me while being in one of the centres here in London, her father was pointed out to me, to which I went up to salam him. I don't even know if I even had the intention of introducing myself to him, but at least I went up to salam him, and he just walked past me. without even acknowledging my salam, which of course in Islam is compulsory. Now again, we can give people the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he didn't hear me, perhaps he had poor hearing, although he didn't feel like that at the time. And you slowly begin to realize that Islam is one thing, and amongst brothers as well, you know, things are fine to a particular degree. However, in reality, the situation isn't always as it seems. I remember when I first came to Islam as well, there was a Pakistani brother who was very, very kind towards me and was trying to help me along in the deen, and basically told me whenever I needed anything, he would be at my beck and call. And then it transpired at a later date that another revert brother was interested in marrying his sister. And from that day on, we never had any communication anymore. He turned cold towards me, and unfortunately he saw me, it felt almost as an enemy to him. So yeah, what we know from Quran and what we hear from the example of the Prophet and the Imams, I would say, especially for those who come from an Afro-Caribbean background, isn't what they experience on the ground.
This is a very sensitive issue, especially for parents who don't attach themselves to the Islamic teachings. And I can say that we need to remind the brothers and sisters that it is not the color, it is not the tribe, it's not even the nationalism or the country which we are living in. It is the taqwa which will help us, and it is this issue we need to have that strength to say that I need to cross beyond my community, beyond my country, in order for me to look for a suitable, we can say, spouse or future husband or wife of my daughter. And if we go really for taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the doors for us.
Mostly Khojas have come from India, and they haven't seen any other tribes except their own Khojas in India. When they came to settle in Africa, most of the people who went into interiors to do business, to do kawala, they got married with African women, and so we find so many children coming up as double caste. We can't say half caste, but double caste. There are some Khojas with some African women. So where they have come from? They have come from these intermarriages. So that was only one-sided. Now I fail to understand why Khoja's girls cannot get married to Africans, or here in London I see some Khoja girls have got married to whites. Why not to Africans?
Why is that the case? I don't know. It could have a lot to do with the perception that people, unfortunately till this day, still have of black people. You know, people still consider black people to be the how can I say, those that should be at the bottom of society. And unfortunately, we as Muslims don't look at the iman of a particular person first and foremost before looking at other aspects as well. Of course, one's capability to earn a living, one's profession, all of these things are very important, but I am of the opinion that for most, of course there are definitely mu'mineen and mu'minat, believing parents out there who would do so, but my belief is that for most, even if somebody were to come back with a PhD or be a nuclear scientist, there would still be objections based on the person's colour. Of course, if you were to look at the revert community, especially those from the Afro-Caribbean background, there are a higher and higher percentage of those who are university graduates and are holding down very respectful jobs that the born communities would also be proud of. So if that is the case and they have such jobs and are able to command, decent middle-class salaries, but are still not being able to marry into these communities, then I guess this is a question that would need to be thrown back at those communities.
This is based on colonialism, especially with the older generation. They have some of them, of course, the attitude that there was a time people were divided into whites and Asians and Africans. These Africans or blacks were the third class citizen. So unfortunately, the same kind of mindset you can find in our communities these days. So these are the brothers who suffer when it comes to the issue of getting married and the issue of being accepted in the community. But however, this is changing nowadays with new generation because they didn't experience the issue of colonialism.
It took me over, I didn't get married until some 13 years after I had reverted to Islam, also approximately. For me to get married, I had to make the decision to go abroad, to go to the place of the birth of my parents. Initially, why I had never considered it earlier were because I was always worried about the cultural difference. See, I considered that me, as somebody who'd grown up in the UK, would have more in common with a, let's say, Pakistani or a Khoja who grew up here in the UK and were religious Muslims than maybe even going back to the country of my parents' birth, somewhere where I considered that my connection to was quite trivial. But it got to a stage where I had to consider it, and that was really the only way that I felt I was going to get married. And alhamdulillah, it did work out for me, and all of the concerns I had about the cultural clash and the borders of the UK, and maybe look at going back to either the country of where their parents came from or other such countries of the same colour as them where they may be able to find a good, pious Muslim Shia wife came from, or other such countries of the same colour as them where they may be able to find a good, pious Muslim Shia wife.
Our Rasulullah also said that Bilal must have a girl, Muslim, but any girl. He didn't go around and said that, no, it should be only black or like that.
I don't know if it's a bitterness, but when people revert to Islam, we have heard stories of brothers and sisters who maybe not left the deen, but have at least left the communities, including even the revert community, because of what they see. They come to Islam because of this beautiful utopian ideal that they read about in the Quran and the Hadith and the Islamic literature. And so they come to Islam with this mindset, and they now feel that they've found where they're supposed to be. And then for some, eventually they become quite shocked with what they see, quite disgusted with what they see, and this causes them to, at least, as I say, divorce themselves from the community.
I don't think, to me, it would matter whether he was black, brown or pink, as long as he was a Muslim, then I don't think the color of his skin would matter much to me at all. No.
I think if your culture is very important to you, so for example, I think Indians would perhaps hold their culture very important, especially I think if they're if they're not in India, right? Then for them it's very important for them to stick with their own, or they just like sticking with their own, you know, that this is more familiar to them.
When you think about your children marrying, you think they're going to marry a brown, Khoja, Shia, Ishnashri person, and then a white person, and you think, oh, he's white, he's from a Christian background, his parents are still Christians. And then you think about that and you accept it, and then you're happy with your acceptance. So when it comes about a black person, maybe you'd think about it then. At the moment, I don't have any views on it at all.
All men, all revert men are having this problem. Not only in the Shia community, the Sunnis as well have the same complaint. The men, because Muslim families find it very difficult to trust someone who is just reverted to Islam, and they find very difficult to give their daughter to a revert. But it's easy, much easier other way around.
Well, obviously a lot of our mosques are split into predominantly what culture you belong to. So you have Khoja mosques and Iraqi mosques. I understand why they are split in this way, that because you have certain ways of doing things within a culture that you may prefer that environment, you know, and so they tend to group together. That makes sense. At the same time, you know, we have to think what are converts supposed to do? If we are too cultural within our mosque, if we are too cliquey, if we are too fixed on, for example, Urdu lectures or, you know, one language, what are new Muslims? You know, we're supposed to be inviting people to Islam. So new Muslims, what are they supposed to do? And like statistically, I think you'll find that when people revert or they become Muslim and then they go back and they leave Islam, it's because they've not felt part of a community. Yeah, we have to just keep Islam obviously at the forefront rather than culture. I think if culture starts to overtake Islam or compromise certain things in Islam or contradict in any way, then we have to be very careful.
Marriage, in general, is already a huge challenge. So, should we as Muslims embark on mixed marriages or stick to our own, so to speak?
In all cultures and all countries, there are some restrictions, like in Iraqi community, they would not want their daughters to marry even other Arabs from other countries.
I personally think it's a very good idea because we have to follow the Prophet's ruling, and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not discriminate anybody.
Islam doesn't have any restriction because there is a verse of Holy Quran which very clearly says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us from different tribes and races to know each other. And what is the best way of knowing each other is mixed marriages.
When it comes to community and cultural background, I feel personally that if people don't look at their culture side, they're looking at the Islam, what they're following, there shouldn't be any problems.
The mixed marriages are taking place in our community. It depends community to community. Amongst the Iranians, there are a lot of mixed marriages. Amongst Arabs, Lebanese have more mixed marriages than Iraqis and other nationalities. Mixed marriages are also taking place in Indian subcontinent, people from Indian subcontinent, and although the number is not that high.
The Indian Pakistani community are resistant to interracial, are a little resistant to interracial marriages, simply because it's something they're not used to. It's not something that happens back home, and so coming to this country, obviously, they're quite aware of the fact that they're not within a Muslim society and that they want to maintain those traditions and those cultures. So interracial marriages tend to be something that the community is a little bit resistant to.
You'd expect me to say, you know, this is not Islam, which of course it isn't, and open up and so on and so forth. But really, I don't really have anything to say to them, because if they're really that resistant, I don't think anything I say here will change their viewpoint. I think we reverts, and when I say reverts, not just those from an Afro-Caribbean background, but from wherever we are, we have to enter into this deen with the realization of exactly what we are entering into, because this, inshallah, will only make us stronger. And, you know, these trials and tribulations is not something that I would wish on anybody, but they do, in the long run, inshallah, make you stronger. Those communities, I don't know. Call me a pessimist, but I don't necessarily see things changing. If the Imam were to reappear tomorrow, his reaction to all this would obviously be in the negative. We know of the fact that even the Imams themselves, you know, it wasn't the case that the Imams just stuck to their two Arab women You know, the fact that they married women from Persia, and of course, more pertinent to what I'm discussing, Africa itself. So, of course, we know that this is not something that the imams would condone.
The elders prefer to stick to the principles that they had back home, and they prefer their youngsters not to marry outsiders. From Islamic point of view, there is no restriction. If we look at the example of the life of holy imams and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we find holy imams' mothers or wives came from all different nationalities. They gave their daughters to non-Sayyids and sisters to non-Sayyids as well, and there was no restriction for that. The elders may create some problem, but the youngsters don't seem to have any problem with the mixed marriages. Although mixed marriages can bring problems if the couple, both partners are not willing to compromise. The best solution for being successful in mixed marriage is that the criteria for living together should be Islamic principles, not cultural values. We should be willing to give up to 50% of our cultural values, and especially any value that may contradict with Islamic teaching should not be adhered with.
That is definitely an issue with some people, not all the people, when their children are marrying. Because like I said before, some issues could rise about not fitting into the family or the culture or the extended family. So yeah, people do have issues about it.
Some people are ready to accept their spouse from different communities, regardless they are African, Asian, or even whites. As long as there is a taqwa, because Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salatu wasalam says that if one gets married, his half religion is already achieved, and half religion is practicing taqwa.
Well, when your children are marrying outside your community, you don't know where they're coming from. Because when they're marrying into your own community, you know the parents, maybe you know them since Africa or wherever you come from. And they always used to say, oh, look at the family before you give your daughter away. And then, obviously, I don't know Chris's family. Similarly, other people don't. So people are going to have worries about it.
At the end of the day, when you get married, it's like an old cliche, but it's very true. You don't marry a person, you marry a family. So, to get married and to know that, for some reason, it would just, I would find it very difficult to find that, if my in-laws, my sort of almost like adopted parents, if you like, in a way, when you get married, it's like if they were to think less of me, or in some way I was inferior, in some way not good enough, because of the fact of like the color of my skin or my origin, I would find that very difficult. I would find it very hard to really feel comfortable around the family, and especially the fact that it's something, these kind of ideas is something which is so rejected by Islam. So if you saw a practicing religious family who had this kind of attitude towards someone because of the color of their skin or their cultural background, I would find it hard. First of all, I'd feel very uncomfortable. And I think also I'd find it very hard to respect the family and to have a really good relationship with them. So no, it's very important, I think, to have that.
We can see the example of that in the beginning of Islam as well. People who migrated from Mecca to Medina, they had to adopt a new way of life. Although the distance was not that far and not that great, but they had to live in a new environment. So we have to adopt the new environment as long as it doesn't contradict with Islamic values.
I don't think it's a question of diluting culture. I think it's a question of more evolving culture. I think here our culture is evolving.
Culture is developed by the people who live in one area. So we are not going to be immigrants for the rest of our life. And the future generation who is going to live in this country will have their own culture, which will have this kind of mixed marriages. Someone with Chinese origin born in UK and someone with Indian origin born in UK would easily feel comfortable to marry each other if both of them are Shia Muslims.
I've got no negativities of coming from a mixed background. My father is Italian and my mother is Pakistani. I came from a very liberal background. I was brought up as a Muslim. However, still having said that, I still got an influence from other cultures, from my father's side being Catholic, and I would regularly come back and forth to Italy, and it's not been a negative one. It hasn't had any negative effects on my upbringing.
We have cases where divorce has taken place in mixed marriages, and yeah, you could say if the foundation was not laid properly, then there are chances of divorce, higher chances of divorce in these cases.
I definitely think that we're becoming more open-minded to it. Before, it was quite taboo thinking that, oh, someone from an Asian background is marrying someone from a non-Asian background. It was seen as quite heretical to a certain, and very outlandish. However, now we are becoming much more open to the idea, and alhamdulillah as well, Islam is growing vastly. We've seen that so many reverts have coming, so I think it's much more accepting when you see someone, either a brother or a sister from an Asian background marrying a non-Asian, and I think people look at that and they say, subhanallah, if that person has come to Islam and they've accepted our culture, then that's a very good thing. And yes, before it may have not been as accepting as it is today.
It is good because multi-ethnic culture will be produced, you know, and as long as the people are okay and they really love each other, they respect each other, and they're from the same sector even, and from the same religion, it's very good. There will be a culture of understanding, you know, and a culture of a multi-ethnic culture will come into existence among Muslims, among the followers of the Ahlulbayt. It's a very good thing, as far as I believe. It should be.
People, if they're not accepting of it, they need to start becoming accepting of it. I think people need to broaden their horizons and open up their minds and take the wool over their eyes. And if you're not doing it, I think you're putting your children in a very dangerous situation, because we live in a society, Britain is a very multicultural society, and if we're not allowing our children to integrate with that society, you know, we're just putting them into a box, and eventually they need to come out of that box.
Prophet has said, no one is superior to another. Only a person is superior on the basis of pious. I mean, the most righteous is the most honorable in the eyes of God. That is the criteria in our religion. Nor the black man is superior than a white man, nor a rich man is superior than a poor man. As long as the people respect each other, they love each other, you know, it's okay. It should be.
In the Quran it says that I don't look at colour, creed or anything, I look to the intentions of someone's heart. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't forbidden us from marrying other people from different cultures, so who are we as people to go against Allah's view? Yes, I can understand that there may be certain problems that can come from a mixed marriage due to culture clash. However, you have that even within people marrying from the same culture as well.
Someone came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he sought his advice for the spouse he's trying to find for his daughter. What should be the criteria? And he said, look for piety and education. And then he explained that if the person you are looking for your daughter's marriage is pious, if he likes your daughter, he will be very kind and extremely good to her. And if he doesn't like her, he will not oppress her, he would let her go. So if the criteria is piety in looking for a spouse for your sister or daughter or a female member of your family, then you would get those benefits, that the person would not be at least oppressive towards these ladies of your family. So according to Prophet Muhammad, piety is the criteria. Unfortunately, in some cases, the parents believe, especially migrated parents, believe that a cousin would be the most appropriate equal partner for their children, and they insist to bring cousins for marriage from outside the country. And although they might be from same blood and same race and same background, but I can't say same background because they are brought up in different part of the world, and these kids are brought up in this part of the world, and they cannot be equal. I have even seen cases of divorce in ulama's family who followed this principle of finding a spouse for their daughters or sons from abroad, back home from the family members, and they ended up in divorce. Both of them were pious. Both of them were religious minded. Both of them from same ulama's family. But the person who came from abroad could not look and understand the society here, and they could not live together. And the divorce took place, and after divorce the same person got married to another pious person from the same city and same area, and they are happily married now after divorce, while the first person who they got married to was a cousin or someone from back home from the pious family. So this is very important as well. We have to make sure that they understand each other, because the way we look at the things and issues and the way we trust each other.
When we talk about marriage, this is an institution which is very holy. And if you look at the Holy Quran, the teachings of the Holy Prophet and Imams alayhimus salam, you see that they encourage us to marry. And the criteria for marriage is not a background of someone, where does he or she comes from. It is the issue of taqwa and the issue of piousness, which is very important. When we look at the life of the Holy Prophet, we see that he married from Arabs, non-Arabs. For example, Maria al-Qibtiyya, who was a Copt from Egypt. And then when you look at the lives of the Imams of Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam, you see that they married many women who are not Arabs. So the issue of mixed marriage, if we want really to look at practical side of it, we look at these holy people and we see that they married from different communities and backgrounds. So the answer is yes, it is allowed so long as the taqwa is there.
Trust your children. It's amazing how often they come to the right conclusion, possibly in a different way than you might have done. I think it's also important to ask yourself, if you don't trust your children, where have you gone wrong as a parent?
My message is that we are living in a global village now. The boundaries and borders have been broken, and the elders should not be restrictive on their children for these kind of marriages, and as long as we should educate them to look for piety and education in their children rather than anything else. And I don't think it should be any problem. We need to raise our standard of education in these issues. In Islam, there is no race or no culture. Culture should be Islamic culture, and we are all sisters and brothers from one father and mother, which is Adam and Hawa. So we should not discriminate against each other.
Of course, there's no, colour, size, if you like, what you look like. Obviously, is not important at all in Islam. And often we hear that verse at weddings that Allah has made us into different nations and tribes so that we get to know one another. I think a lot of problems, like you hear about fights and these really bad things that happened, are often based on people saying, I need to stick to my tribe and my way. And I think it's very interesting and to know a different culture. But marriage is hard. So if these things for you are going to cause problems, if there's somebody not happy with it, or you're not quite happy with it, or don't just do it because for the sake of it. Because marriage is hard. So you wouldn't want to. Yourself, what is important to you culturally, or for example, the only thing that I could think that Chris, for example, can't speak to my grandma. But to be honest, my grandma, she hardly understands when I speak to her. So, and he'll say he knows how to say chai, tea, and things like that. And they wouldn't really interact much anyway. And sometimes like, not at his family gatherings, obviously only speaking English, I'm fine. Sometimes at our family gatherings, if it's extended family, people will be speaking Gujarati, and I'll feel bad for him. Like, I'll try and switch it to English, but they just can't get used to speaking in, or sometimes they speak in English. And my dad will quite often say speak in English, but people can't get used to it. They say their jokes in Gujarati, and then sometimes my dad will translate, and then sometimes he'll forget. But Chris spent a lot of time within his Iraqi family, within their culture, and same thing, he didn't really used to understand a lot. So he's quite patient in that situation, I think, more than I would be. I would find it quite hard. And obviously I do feel sad sometimes that he can't enjoy the environment as much as I can, but that's a few times a year, you know, so overall it's fine.
Islam respects different cultures and everything, but I mean you can see in the example of the early reverts. You know, we have a very famous example of Bilal. We have you know, we had Salman al-Farsi. You know, we had I mean the very early, you know, the very early Muslim community was drawn from all different colours. You know, from black to what, you know, from the black to the Persians to the Arab to everyone. You know, was with the Prophet, and were amongst the best. You know, the best of you know, the best of ummahs. You know, this was the best community, and they were drawn from all over. So we can see that Islam doesn't really have this concept of racial supremacy, and so I really do think that Islam is colourblind. But you know, again, Islam and Muslims, there can be sometimes, you know, a gap between the two, because none of us are perfect, and we do find it difficult to follow, you know, to follow Islam in its pure sense. The most important ingredients is an ability. I think it's as a number. I think it's having good communication is very, very important. So, you know, like not letting something build up, something, for example, that might annoy you, and you let it build up and build up and build up to explode, rather than just communicating it in the first instance. I think that's important. You know, or you can have one person who's very upset and very unhappy with things, and the other person doesn't have a clue about it, and it can cause all kinds of problems. So I think that's very important. I think having patience, you know, you need to have a huge deal of patience in the beginning, because sometimes it can be difficult, because, you know, you've grown up your entire life. You've got people who are around you, who are your friends and family, who know you very well, and who have learnt to accept you and learnt to be with you. You know, learn how you are, and you start to become complacent in yourself, because you're not challenged as a, you know, your personality is not challenged, because the people around you know you very well and know how to interact with you. And all of a sudden you meet someone and they come into your life, and it's almost like they hold up a mirror to your personality. You know, it's like someone is all of a sudden there, and you're accountable for your actions, you know, in private and all the time. It's, you know, it's like. You know, if you've got particular bad temper in the morning, for example, or if you are particularly lazy at a certain time, or if you have, you know, certain character defects, if you have a quick temper, then these would all be brought out when you get married. And this is a great thing about marriage, because it enables you to work and to refine your character. And I think I'm sure this is one of the reasons why, you know, marriage is so important in Islam. You know, why it makes up, some narrations say, half of your religion. You know, I think it's because of you get this chance to have all of your character defects brought out and to work on them. But at the same time, I think it takes a lot of patience. To, you know, you have to have that patience to be able to actually work on yourself and work on, you know, work together to try to get used to this change. So I think patience, good communication is very important. As well, I think just having common goals, common aspirations, you know, being after the same thing. If you're just sort of going through life and you have no kind of purpose, then it's you know, it can be difficult. Whereas if you're just trying to push in one direction, then that's, I think, is really important as well. I think that's the main things.
I think if people are very negative about mixed marriage, I think my response would be to ask why. I think because they think you can just say, I don't want someone to be married because they're white. I think you have to say, well, okay, that's not really an acceptable response. You have to have a reason as to why you want to have it. Is it because you're worried about them losing culture? In which case you say, okay, well, how do we address this point? You know, we maintain a strong cultural core with the children, and, you know, on both sides. You know, is it because you're worried about the person not being a good Muslim? Well, then you address that. But you know, from the marriage I've seen, the the religion has been very, very strong from Chris, arguably stronger than most Muslims I know. In fact, definitely stronger than most Muslims I know. So I think that my response would be asking the question, well, why do you have that objection? And to rationalise it and to build an argument rather than just a very blind perspective saying I'm not happy with it, because I think that doesn't reflect well on anyone, on the individual, on the community. It looks ignorant. So you have to ask the question as to why that. And I think if you drill down into that question, I think there's most people will think, well, there's not really any good reasons as to why you have this objection.
Oh, they should meet the boy their girl or boy wants to marry, definitely, whether he's white or it doesn't matter. Look at the person, look at how he's going to maybe. I mean, you can't say a person is going to be like this in 20 years' time. People do change. But what you look at for the time being and see the honesty in their eyes, the honesty in their being Muslims, I think that's what matters. So long as your child is happy with their partner. After all, that's what you want. You force them into marrying somebody they don't want to marry.
If there's parts of the culture which are in some way contrary to Islam, then it's quite good, because it gives a chance to not just challenge the individuals when you come together to look at yourselves and to reassess your own personalities, but also reassess your cultural, to reassess the culture. So this can really highlight some, because things which may be questions which were never questioned questioned before. So in some ways it can be good. I think if the culture, is something, if the culture is something which is important to the family and which is important to the individual person's sense of identity, and which is also important to, and which doesn't run contrary to Islam, or which actually is encouraged by Islam in some aspect, then obviously if that gets diluted, then that can be a problem for the individual, because they may feeling a part of a culture is very important. It is very important, and so if by marriage that in some way gets diluted, then I think that could be difficult. But I don't see it in reality. I mean, I enjoy going to my local mosque, which is mainly sort of Indian or Khoja culture, and I find I can fit in very easily. I don't think our children would have any kind of cultural dilemma or crisis, not knowing, because I think they would have. They would understand their culture. I mean, I'd like my children to learn Gujarati, so they would be able to, speak to their wider family who maybe live in Tanzania. Maybe their English isn't so strong. I'd like them to have that cultural identity as well. So I think as long as you don't go out of your way to try and destroy that culture, I don't see it as being such a problem. I think the most important thing is just to judge. There's criteria. You want the best for your. If you want the best for your daughter, then there's criteria for assessing a person or judging a person, knowing a person. If the person has very good akhlaq, if you can tell that the person for example visits your local masjid, that they are a good practicing, they have that a person to know and to have good manners and good taqwa. This is the most important thing. I mean, I can understand why someone would be nervous, because if, for example, the boy or the man is from a different religion, this could potentially potentially a very big problem. But I think it's very important to recognise the difference. So is the person are they practicing a Muslim? Are they believing? Do they have this taqwa? Then in that case, then there should be no difference judging between them and any other Muslim, because it's all the same. If the situation is different, then obviously it may be more of a cause for concern. But I think the first thing is to find out in more detail what exactly is happening, what exactly is the person like, what is the motives, what is everything else, and then you can make a judgment. Rather than just jumping in there straight away and saying, Indian good, white bad. This is just I'm making a snap decision. Then that must be avoided. But once I think the most important thing is once to find out the situation, and then once you can judge you can make the judgment on the same criteria that you would judge someone who's coming from an Indian culture. I think the biggest problem, and I'm sure it will always be the biggest problem, is that people being driven by motives other than the pleasure of Allah. This is really the biggest problem amongst Muslims. So if you're motivated by your national pride, or by your racial pride, or by your sectarian pride, whether it's for your own particular madhab, you're driven by a sectarian sort of passion for your mother, you know, then this is the biggest problem that we have. You know, even if it's dressed up sometimes as religious, like zeal or religious passion, sometimes it's just sectarianism, or like we say in Arabic, asabiya, you know, prejudiced, just disguised. So I think this is the biggest problem that we have today. And linking it back to the question of like intercultural marriages, you know, we have to be careful to make sure that we're making judgments based on you know the teachings of Islam and the true Islam, rather than asabiya or prejudice, like you know, tribalism, culture, sectarianism, rather than anything else. And I think, you know, if we could make that our number one criteria, then you know, all the problems that we have would be gone, basically.
I think mixed marriages can work. They can be very complementary to one another. It will enable both parties to the marriage to embark on a journey of learning languages, culture, food, places of travel. I think in some instances mixed marriages can be difficult if the differences between the two parties are so great that they're unable to bridge the gap. Having said that, I do think that those differences perhaps relate to differences of character as opposed to culture. Alhamdulillah, that the religion that we follow, being Muslim, means a lot of those cultural and traditional issues don't actually have much weight. You know, we pray to one God, we have one Prophet, we have the 12 Imams, and that's a universal truth. So, alhamdulillah, in Islam, mixed marriages themselves aren't so much of an issue, as long as there's good character and both parties are practicing tolerant Muslims. I don't think mixed marriages are an issue in themselves at all.
يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير.
The Karbala tragedy is not only about shedding tears for the Holy Imam and his companions. It is about learning from Imam Hussein's way of life and indeed death. Imam did not discriminate anyone based on their culture or race. People of all backgrounds could be found in the Holy Imam's army in Karbala. Indeed, due to his marriage to women from diverse cultures, his children also had mixed bloods.